Yo, parish orphans and retrogrades. Today with me is Michael Hitchborn, a friend of Rules for Retrogrades. He's the president of the Lepanto Institute, and he was the number one guy I wanted to talk to about this story, which broke just February 18th, not long ago, 11 days ago. And within about a week and a half, 9 days time already, it was a failure for those agents, the USCCB, who were trying to strike out at Trump. What happened is the USCCB filed a February 18th lawsuit which challenged a federal decision to suspend federal funding for refugee assistance programs administered by various Catholic charities across the country. The USCCB distributes funds and serves as coordinator of those programs. And already, just yesterday or the day before, the USCCB got smacked down. So we're going to talk about the original challenge and the smackdown, which happened within 10 days' time, which is hilarious and delicious in a way. Michael Hitchborn, my good sir, how are you doing? You have a little bit of a cold, but and you've been out of commission a bit. So I'm glad you can come talk about this with me.
No, it's an important topic, and I think that the understanding what's happening with the USCCB and the consequences of this is really topical and very important.
Right. I mean, because let's first talk about, not necessarily, before we do that, let's talk about not the consequences, but the implications of the fact that we have a national bishops conference here in the U.S. of so many queens that I just mean, and ninnies. That's all I mean. That they're being ninnies about stuff so much that when Trump says, hey, immigration's a problem, we're going to suspend federal funding for refugee assistance programs because they've been corrupted to a kind of internationalist anti-borders agenda, relatively obviously so, clearly so. The bishops get together and they say, this violates our religion. They don't say this very clearly when it comes to any of the actual issues that the Leviathan Rainbow USA has come to stand for the proposition of. But they say it when Trump wants to do something that's very Catholic, which is building a wall, defending in the name of the fourth commandment, sovereign borders. The Vatican has 22-foot walls around Vatican City. So I think we have to talk some about that. The actual works of mercy that these queens in the National Bishops Conference should stand for, they don't. And something that they shouldn't stand for, they do. We have to begin there.
Sure. One of the things that drives me crazy about what the USCCB has done and what the bishops are constantly doing, if you read their rhetoric, the way they put things forward, it's almost as if anybody who comes to the border and says, I'm running away from poverty, they automatically have a right to come across the border without any real background check, without understanding, well, what is your situation? What's going on in your own country? Is there any assistance that your own country can provide for you so that you can build a good and healthy life within your own community? No, they say anybody who comes to the border and says, I'm running away from this terrible situation, oh goodness, we have to help them because they say they need help. That's not how it works. If you have somebody in the streets walk up to you and they're obviously hopped up on something and they say, hey man, can you give me $10? It's like, what for? Well, I'm hungry. Okay, I'll tell you what, I'll buy you a sandwich. No, man, can you just give me $10? See, this is the problem. They've taken this idea of charity and they've made it into an unquestioning proposal where you're not allowed to question and you're not allowed to look into the background of the individual asking for help. No, you just have to help and assist them in whatever way possible. And it's not just, and it's certainly not wise.
Yeah, agreed. And it's a great analogy because sure, helping people around the world is what the Roman Catholic Church has always done spiritually, but also corporally. And we have corporally always done what we can to help people around the world by building, secondary institutions of education, primary institutions of education, colleges and universities when they were actually good, hospitals, libraries. Basically, all the institutions of Western civilization were built or improved upon by the Roman Catholic Church. We love that stuff. The Roman Catholic Church has never in its bimillennial history stood for the idea that you can't have countries. As a matter of fact, that is from the book of Revelation and other books of scripture. as emblematic of the man of sin, the man of perdition, and end times, when borders become illegal and you have one world government, which is essentially the logical entailment of what they're lobbying for, the USCCB.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, last night on our Anchor Team program, I spent an hour explaining that the New World Order that is being called for is being established through these Catholic aid agencies. What they are creating, and I have several documents written by Catholic bishops that are calling for a form of global governance. And they want to work, they say, with the World Trade Organization, with the World Economic Forum, with all of these different international aid agencies and these different international banking industries to establish a form of universal governance throughout the world. So yeah, this open borders thing plays exactly into that. In fact, if you read the documents, there's one that I read specifically last night. It was written in 2001. And it directly called for a and not specifically open borders, but it certainly called for free movement across borders and for the right of migrants to go into any country that they choose. Ultimately,
You're right. That codifies rather explicitly what we're saying is insinuated by the fact that anytime someone wants to tighten up their borders, these guys start rattling their sabers and saying that it's unchristian, and they're really threatened by it. Yeah. Well, that looks like the trappings, the indicia of globalism. And then when you actually take a peek at the books, and you know, you're the guy I want to talk to because you have taken peeks at the books of actual smoking guns, which would be indicative of actual globalism, then unfortunately it seems to be there too. And I know a lot of the bishops in the USCCB aren't necessarily lock, stock, and barrel proponents of this stuff. A lot of them are just overfed queens that are kind of going along with the majority. I mean, that's most of human history is emperor's new clothes. Mm-hmm. But at the head of the snake, the guys that are really running this understand what they're doing, and they are discouraging implicitly and explicitly anyone who says no, borders matter, countries matter, we don't need it's perfectly morally and legally upright to have national borders that we defend.
Absolutely. Well, especially when you have an infrastructure, and I've explained this on other programs, but when you look at a demographic movement, okay, you have people moving from one country to another, and we're not talking small numbers. This is mass migration. And if you have a mass migration from one country to another, you cause problems in both countries. The one that's losing the population has a loss of workforce, a loss of income, a loss of production, a loss of commerce. So they lose an awful lot by having a large amount of the population leave the country. Within the country that's receiving these people, they don't have the infrastructure necessarily to house, to feed, to clothe, to transport this massive influx of people all at once. So when you have that kind of migration going on, you put a strain on the resources of the country receiving them. So right. All of this, you know, the USCCB isn't really considering the demographic repercussions of what they're doing. They're just saying, oh, but charity, but charity. It's not charity to throw somebody into a situation that's going to cause a strain on the resources of the country you're putting them in. It's not charity. That's, in many ways, it's theft. So there's a balance to be had, but the real problem has to do with the mass amounts that we're dealing with. We have to ask the question, why are so many people leaving? And why are they looking to the United States, not anywhere else? Why is the United States the only place they want to go? And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, except that there's propaganda on both sides.
Right. According to this specific lawsuit, the U.S. bishops had been awarded federal funds since 1980 to provide, quote, vetted and approved, end quote, refugees with transitional supportive housing and employment search assistance during the first 90 days in the U.S. The bishops had argued that refugees have a legally established right to federally funded resettlement assistance, quote, which is essential to helping them establish a new home. Resettlement help promotes the successful settlement of refugees in their communities, including by promoting gainful employment or connections to educational opportunities, thereby diminishing the likelihood that newly arriving refugees will be dependent on ongoing public support, the conference argued. So this is how they're situating it as a good for the United States. And it's not a very compelling case. And we know this because within 10 days, their suit was struck down, or at least stayed for the time being. You see how they're trying to situate this, people? Like, if we're going to be getting refugees, you know, the U.S. is better served by helping to situate them. And this isn't actually what the USCCB means, and you can tell because of the issue that they had with President Trump for saying, no, we're not going to do all of this anymore.
The first issue that I have with what you just read is that the USCCB is claiming that it has a right to those funds. That's a problem. And that's a serious problem when you consider that the USCCB is saying that it has a right to tax money. No, the USCCB doesn't even have a right to exist. It doesn't. It's a lobbying agency and a bureaucracy that barely has any real connection to the bishops of the United States, who are busy maintaining their own dioceses. So the USCCB is arguing, first of all, to say that it has a right to federal funding speaks more to its intention to be an NGO than the Catholic Church. The second part of this is that it claims that the country, our country, the refugees are better served by the Catholic Church being engaged in the resettlement. But the question is, how are they better served?
Right.
What makes the difference if the Catholic Church is involved or if somebody else is involved? Because the fact of the matter is, as a condition of receiving federal funds, they're not allowed to proselytize. They're not allowed to evangelize. They're not allowed to talk about the faith. They're not allowed to pray with these people. They're not allowed to hand out pamphlets or rosary beads, nothing. So what makes their action actually specifically Catholic? It makes no sense for the USCCB to make this a religious case when they're not allowed to practice their faith while doing this kind of work.
Yeah, precisely. Well, for once, though, here's the white pill. The court seemed to recognize the veracity in what you're saying, because this happened just late yesterday. The State Department canceled the contract with the USCCB late yesterday, likely bringing to a halt the nationwide effort organized by USCCB to provide settlement services for refugees to the United States. So actually, this isn't a court thing. This is an admin law cancellation. Sorry for saying it that way. And this, as you said in opening, Michael, this leaves uncertain the status of the USCCB lawsuit, aiming to recoup millions, because they want millions. And it's uncertain because it's like, well, now the admin agency that literally was enabling you to at least have standing to make this case was just removed.
Right. Well, when you read what the State Department wrote in their filing with the government, it says the termination of the agreements leaves open only a question of unpaid money under the cooperative agreements, and to the extent the plaintiff disputes any reimbursement, the dispute needs to be brought in the Court of Federal Claims. And here's the linchpin. Even could the court have entertained injunctive relief under the Administrative Procedure Act to compel the State Department to make some action under the agreements during their lifetimes, any such jurisdiction is now clearly absent, as there is no action the court could compel. The parties' agreements are no longer in force, the government argued. So let me explain in layman's terms what just happened. The USCCB was upset that Donald Trump had put a pause on these programs. He didn't cancel the contracts. He just put a pause on the release of the programs. And what the USCCB wanted to do was to open up that tap once again, to force the Trump administration to open up the flow of those funds. So rather than going through the Procedures Act, which is written into their contracts, They filed a lawsuit. So the State Department said, you know what? That's a breach of contract. You were supposed to follow this proper procedure, but you didn't. And because you didn't, now our contracts are null and void. Oh, and by the way, that invalidates this entire concern that you have right now because there's no contract to compel. So now what this does is it turns back to the USCCB and they say, if you want to dispute the $20 million that you think we owe you, then you can go to a claims court to follow that procedure. But there's no case here anymore because you broke the procedure that was in place for filing a grievance. And because you broke that, you broke your contract. We've canceled the contracts, and now you have nothing to argue in court.
Okay, thanks. That's actually helpful. And it makes stark how absurd these queens in the USCCB were being in having any kind of legal expectation to remuneration or redress.